Welcome back to the program, everyone. President Bola Tinubu was in France for a 3-day state visit on the invitation of his French counterpart, Emmanuel Macron. President Tinubu's 3-day visit to France was the first official state visit to Paris by a Nigerian leader in more than 2 decades. And during the visit, Nigeria and France signed 2 major deals, including a $300 million pact to develop critical infrastructure, renewable energy, transportation, agriculture, and healthcare in Nigeria. Both nations also signed an agreement to increase food security and develop Nigeria's solid minerals sector. Tonight, let's speak with Dr. Niyi Akinsiju, journalist, writer, chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiative, as we analyze this historical trip and what it means for Nigeria, amongst other matters. Doctor, good evening to you, sir. Thank you very much for joining us on Politics Tonight. It's good to see you again.
I consider it a privilege. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So this trip to France is, however different in a few respects. Not only is it a state visit, which is a formal visit by the head of a sovereign country at the invitation of the head of state of another sovereign country, but this is the first visit in 24 years by a Nigerian leader. How significant is it?
Very significant. It's for me, it's actually a message to the rest of the world, and by the French government, it's a deliberate overture to Africa. I think globally there is a feel of an emerging power, in Africa, a truly emerging power, and you will see by the nature and profile of visits of the President, Bola Tinubu, across over the last months, there is a feeling of a rush to start associating with him. And that is, I feel it's the global powers, especially the global north, are feeling the fact that this leader that we have in Nigeria would impact Nigeria in a way that Nigeria had not been impacted in a long time. And therefore, they have the power to research into the future, to see into the future. And any power, and I'm talking about any sovereign state that is likely, to grow in a way that it will become a force to be reckoned with in global politics, economy, etc., there is a tendency for those superpowers, especially those in the G7, to start associating with such potential power in a way that they could also be, aligned, with the vision and the objective, the goals and intentions of this emerging power. Nigeria had, over time, been described as the giant of Africa. But
Absolutely.
In most of the time too, the global audience that looked at what is happening within the African continent had always submitted that Nigeria had, yes, had the potentials, but unfortunately had been underperforming in terms of when you relate to the kind of potentials the country have. And that if the true kind of leadership is in place within the Nigerian state, it's likely these potentials, will be properly exploited, and of course advance the true worth and value of the Nigerian sovereign state. So now, what signals, Nigeria has been sending to the world is the fact that here is a president that had determined courageously to take on the limiting factors, the limiting elements, economically speaking especially, that had continued, to be a challenge to the growth and development of Nigeria to what we'll call a true superpower. So I feel that the president of France know that this is the time to start relating with Nigeria. And it's not going to be France alone. You also see that the president moved from France to South Africa. This is the kind of reception Nigeria will be having in the next few years as we unravel, the capacity and the true potentials of the Nigerian sovereign states.
But also, what does it mean for France? Because, one, Nigeria is France's leading trading partner in sub-Saharan Africa and the fourth largest in Africa. Is this a positive sign for President Emmanuel Macron, having sought a renewal between Paris and the African continent since his 2017 election?
Yeah, it is. Of course, we are actually stating a matter of fact. Historically, France is one of our major trading partner, and in fact, in the oil and gas sector, Total Energy, for instance, had been a perennial partner and operator in the oil and gas sector of the Nigerian economy. In fact, the French companies, a number of them, are quite indigenous. We want to describe them as indigenous to the Nigerian oil and gas industry. So to a large extent, that defines the kind of relationship we have. And yes, the renewable energy tendency, venture, as it were, quest, as it were, the reality, and I think we need to also appreciate and commend France, for pushing and supporting Total Energy to determine to invest as much as $750 million in our gas sector. Now, the reality for some of us is that gas as adopted by Nigerian government as the transition fuel. It's an appropriate strategy to adopt, because, well, we have this huge deposit of unused, untapped commercially of natural gas. It will not be appropriate to start shutting down our carbon resources, carbon deposit, as required or as canvassed by Western advocacy. Especially in the light of this zero emission objective. For some of us, indeed, Nigeria and most developing countries should not be the whipping boys, for whatever has been the mistake of the developed world, through which they have developed their own resources, developed their own assets. Now they have access to reference and to exploit as they move into the renewable era. Now that we are still lacking behind, and we have these huge resources in place, it is just natural that we should look at that resources as much as 600 standard cubic feet. 600 trillion standard cubic feet of gas is still embedded in our environment, in the sea, wherever you find oil, you find them. Even where you don't find oil, you still there are independent deposits of natural gas, and natural gas is considered pure gas, clearer energy, more purer energy, of course, than crude. While I won't advocate for an abandonment of crude, but of course, gradually we can start replacing crude oil, with our natural gas, and while doing that, we'll of course be reducing emission. As we are reducing emission, we are of course also exploiting profitably, commercially, natural gas. So we want to thank Total Energy for that commitment, because of course we know that under the influence and pressure of global civil organizations or advocacy groups that have been campaigning against carbon emission, greenhouse emissions and all that, there is this intention to stop any form of exploration, in the crude oil industry, as we are well endowed with it. So now we have this opportunity to continue to exploit our natural gas. It will help us, of course, reinforce and make us wealthier in terms of exploitation of that resources. It will make us start bridging, our emission objective, as it were. So we are going to enjoy, I think, the best of two worlds. We still hold on to our transition-related natural gas, which is still related to crude oil. And of course, we would also be moving towards renewable energy. And we would be contributing our own, to global renewable energy efforts.
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective, Dr. Akisiju, especially at this time when the country is seeking to diversify its energy mix and reduce its carbon footprint. But let's talk about other agreements. There were 2 agreements signed to ensure a partnership on developing critical infrastructure and the long-term sustenance of agriculture and food security. I want you to speak to the significance of this pact to develop critical infrastructure in Nigeria.
How do we determine our development trajectory if we don't have the appropriate infrastructure in place? Unfortunately, historically, we have not placed much emphasis on infrastructural development. As government from government, in turn, had actually focused on surviving, periodically. Surviving in terms of how do we pay salaries? How do we provide for the needs of our workers, especially federal government workers, as it were? By the nature of our constitutional relationship, in terms of tiers of government, the federal government is burdened with a huge responsibility, of providing infrastructure. Are we talking about the 35,000, kilometers of roads that the federal government is responsible, to develop? Are we talking about the power sector that until recently the federal government had been responsible, for its management, either at the level of power generation, transmission and distribution until recently? Are we talking of even how we manage the health of Nigerians? How do we manage education and all that? But in a long while, over a long period of time, we can't say for certain that we have been able to develop the needed critical infrastructure that would actually drive development, because infrastructure are at the heart, of driving development. In terms of one, is it roads, which is responsible, for movement of goods and people, goods, services, and people? Are we talking about power that is responsible for driving capacity for production and productivity? Are we talking about health, access to health at as cheap as possible for Nigerians so that we have a healthy population? Are we talking about education, which is actually the core drive of human capital development? So, and we can go on and on. But what is essential is that wherever we can get the fund, wherever we can get the support to provide and reinforce the development of our infrastructure, we have to go there. And we have to commend, even if it's 300 million. I've had a number of people said it's just a mere 300 million. But in being practical, if 300 million could actually come into this country, and the percentage of that goes into agricultural development, a percentage of that goes into road construction, a percentage of that goes into enhancing our power capacity, power delivery capacity and all that, it would definitely, over a short period of time, reflect in the quality of life of Nigerians. And the most important thing for Nigeria at this time is the quality of life of the more than 200 million Nigerians that we have to manage, And to that extent, knowing that the Nigerian brand is a respected brand across the world, the quality of life of the average Nigerian would, when it is appreciated, when it has enhanced quality, would be respected. The Nigerian person anywhere in the world will be respected as long as our infrastructural capabilities, are enhanced within our domestic environment. So I also commend the French government for this effort. We could have more, but the 300 million euro is not small fund. We hope that we can have them, and of course, talking about food security, we are quite aware of what food security concerns over food security had become in the Nigerian space, either at the level of access to food or at the level of price to food, price of food, of basic food. But I am sure that these had also provided new opportunities. I've been following what the federal government is doing, and we are seeing how, in a big way, the agricultural aspect of our economy is being changed. You know, we are consciously moving away from our subsistence farming history and, of course, profile to a more mechanized, desirable profile. And as we go forward, I am very sure with these efforts that is upcoming, Nigeria would be able to feed itself and, of course, export to the world, because we have the capacity, we have the potentials, we have the land, we have the people. And now that mechanization is coming in, the last I had was about 800 and something number of Nigerians were being trained to use harvesters and ploughers and all that, tractors and all that. Now that is where we should head to. Provide food for the larger population at the cheapest possible rates.
I want us to talk about trade, because if it were to go by the facts available to us, the figures are good and definitely counts for something. But stakeholders are concerned about the nature and structure of the trade relations between both countries. They're nursing the fear that, yes, the figures are looking good, but is there a departure from the colonial pattern since the 1800s? Are these concerns valid for you? Are these mere misconceptions or valid concerns?
Well, our trade, it's still at the basic levels. The truth of the matter is, the quantum of, or the higher percentage of our trade profile is still dominated with the oil and gas products. So to a large extent, it's still a sovereign to sovereign kind of relationship, trade relationship. Until we have a very strong private sector driven exporting platforms, from Nigeria. And that would mean that our manufacturing sector is up and doing and is inspired, of course, provided with the capacity, to produce at global competitive rates. And of course, we now relate back to the limitations we had. We have, as with the infrastructural challenges we have been confronted with. Most of our manufacturing outfits may not be able to provide goods at globally competitive rates, of course, because of the cost of production in country, in Nigeria. So, but as we move forward, we expect these challenges to be resolved, and in a way that going forward, our manufacturers are able to produce at cheaper rates, because it's manufacturing goods, actually, that will form the bulk of non-oil exports to a country like France. They have weaned themselves of manufacturing challenges, and so they manufacture products in a globally competitive way. And of course, they will want to track back, as they have been tracking back through the colonial days, to dump more or less whatever they produce in country. And but my belief is that because we have a huge profile of diversified raw materials, that we only need to be able to explore and exploit. We have the potentials once all the other factors and elements of productions are in place, to produce in a globally competitive manner and compete with any product across the world. This is one of the things the president of France is seeing in Nigeria, with the new kind of leadership that we have, that is conscious and courageous about the kind of policies to put in place to drive the national economy, drive the national vision, and most importantly, drive the urge, the aspiration of the Nigerian people. Whoever is a human development researcher would see that there is something new happening in Nigeria. And the fact of the matter is, in a good way, the people of Nigeria are actually understanding and appreciating this new trajectory. And to that extent...
I like that, Dr. Akisiju. And, I asked that question because both presidents talked about partnerships of equals. And according to reports, Nigeria wants a partnership of equals and not a lecture, especially on human rights. And political analysts in Nigeria say the country needs to be careful after signing a series of agreements with France. And for equal partnerships to take place, Nigeria must get the fundamentals of economic growth and development stabilized and sustainable. Others say for them, there are no signs that France is prepared to pivot from its colonial attitude towards African countries. But you may need to share your perspective on that after this break. Please stay with us, everyone. Welcome back to Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for staying with us on the program. Dr. Niyi Akisiju, journalist, writer, chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiative, is my guest tonight as we discuss President Bola Tinubu's trip, Paris trip, and other matters arising. Doctor, thank you very much for staying with us on the program. So my last question was about a partnership of equals. You may want to share your perspective on that.
Well, I've come across a number of analysts, that have this top-down approach on the Nigerian image, the words of the Nigerian states. We tend to underestimate our potentials. We tend to underestimate our capacity, and it's unfortunate. See, everywhere in the world, there's an agreement that Nigeria is an emerging power. We are just looking for the right switch, to drive our development and our growth. Nigeria is perhaps has the largest market in Africa. It has the largest labor force in Africa. And of recent, we have seen how not just our agricultural sector, the critical or primary aspect of our economy is growing. We have seen also how the secondary tier of our economy, which is manufacturing, is growing but has its own challenges. But most importantly, we have seen how the service industry, the service sector of our economy had actually ballooned. It's gathering so much momentum. So much, if you are talking about partnership, we are a partner of equals with any sovereign state in the world. We are only, I cannot say that we are limited by our vision. We have a strong vision. Now, for instance, in the trip to Paris, the president went with a number of businessmen. But part of the agenda of the Paris engagement was the fact that two Nigerian organically founded, developed financial brands, Zenith Bank and UBA PLC, were actually in Paris, one to establish its presence. Zenith established its presence with an operating license. And if you know how strict it is how strict is the regulation, financial regulation in France, you will appreciate what it takes to have a banking operating license in France by Nigerians made, Nigerian grown financial brand. We also have UBA, coming on the heels of Zenith Bank to be established in France. And of course, it means that it will not just be a metropolitan, they will not just have a metropolitan headquarters, they have a license to operate across the country. So it tells you, of course, how the true worth of the Nigerian sovereign state. So if we are talking about partnership, what we have been doing with France, either at the level of the industry of oil and gas sector, at the level of other forms of production, for me, has been partnership. And Nigeria is no longer a pushover. I take pride in that. Nigeria is no longer a pushover in global politics, in global economy. Well, and of course we are in the 50, ranking in terms of global GDP out of a possible 192 countries. Now we are still low income state. By the time we drive all our capacity, by the time we are able to realize our potentials, we should be at least minimum of 20.
Thank you for that, Dr. Akisiju, because thank you very much for that, for going there. Because in one of the clips we saw, the president emphasized on the need for both countries to intensify cooperation across various sectors. He was warning that the implementation, not the mere signing of MOUs, constitutes the success of the partnership. It also means that Nigeria needs to do its own homework to ensure the deals secured by the president are well implemented. So what must government do to ensure success of these deals?
But I think government, that's why I talked about what Macron and other leaders, especially of the G7, cadre, are saying in Nigeria. One, if I were the head of government of a G7 state, as soon as the president of Nigeria was sworn in, I would get my foreign affairs and my intelligence unit to do a background check on him. I need to understand where this person is coming from, his capability and his capacity. After I receive a report on him, I would, by the time I looked at, of course, his experiences, his exposures, and his, of course, professional cleavages and all that, I should be able to form an opinion that this person already comes with a natural and, of course, professional capacity to lead. And in the first 12 months, I will also do an aggregation of the kind of policies that have been conceived and the kinds of policies that have been implemented within that sovereign state. And of course, my immediate conclusion would be that this person is courageous, is creative, and is changing the paradigm, of the economy of the Nigerian state. And to that extent, we will see that what this government is trying to do is to move away from that populism dependency paradigm to where you have a free market economy. And to have a free market economy, you will need to have a drive. You will need to have an active collaboration of the private sector. And if you have the active collaboration of the private sector, it means directly or indirectly, the private sector, the players in that private sector would have to be supported. And what comes to mind at this point in time is the tax bills. The 4 tax bills that had been introduced or presented to the National Assembly that had caused so much uproar. If we take time to look at the tax bills, we see provisions that are supporting industries. We see provisions that are supporting human capital development. We see provisions that are supporting increased standard of living of Nigerians. We see provisions that are supporting higher earnings. We see provisions that are supporting increased purchasing power. So when you look at that in that universe, you are seeing a lot of economic activities. You are seeing a lot of unlocking economic potentials. And once you do that, because my own view about global power or about the sovereign strength, global respect for a sovereign country, is that you must have an economy that is buoyant itself, domestically. It is based on that, that the global community will relate with you. So if you look at some of the policies that are being put in place, it is obvious that the Nigerian potentials, is being unlocked. And once you are able to get it right with the free market economy, and of course, I believe it's not just going to be an unbounded free market economy. I know there will be guide rails, for the free market economy approach, but to a large extent, you will see the activities of the private sector more obvious, and to that extent, you see more fulfilled, more enhanced capacity of the private sector that can stand its own anywhere in the world with whoever is coming into Nigeria to partner and to work with. So, and if you also remember, there was a particular conference, I think UN, the 2023 UN Assembly, where the president addressed the UN Assembly. And the major core of his address was that the global north must respect, and treat the global south, especially we of the African continent, with respect, with mutual respect, and of course see us as peers. Africa has come a long way. We are no longer the Africa of the 1960s or the early 1970s. We are also.
If we must have a buoyant economy in this country, everything cannot be left to the federal government, which is where the governors come in. How will you rate their complementary roles?
I can't get that clearly, but what I'm actually saying is that with the government approach to free market economy, what is obvious is the enhanced roles of the private sector, and to a large extent, we are seeing that already. The government can only provide enabling environment, for the private sector. And to that extent, we are also lucky we have operators in the private sectors that are also capable, and that is why we have a Nigerian brand, a Nigerian banking brand in Paris today. If you get to Paris, you see Zenith Bank in operation. Very soon you see UBA in operation, and of course, the Nigerian banking brand, especially, had actually taken over the whole of Africa. If you go to anywhere you go to in Africa, you see Access Bank. You see First Bank, you see the Guaranteed Trust Bank, you see you see UBA, you see Zenith Bank, and all that. So there is a need to first acknowledge that capacity, and of course the reflection of our growth in the financial sector. And going forward, what I would desire now is an active collaboration between the Nigerian government, and not just at the federal government level, at the state level. The state governments have a role to play, in driving development, especially of the economic sort within their region, within their state. Don't forget that an idea is formed to become an entity, a living entity within a state first, because before it's even escalated to the federal government level. The office of a company is first situated in a ward, then in a local government, then in a state. So if you have development at the grassroots, growing from the grassroots, if you have good roads in a ward, if you have good access to education, if you have access to good health in a ward, it's most likely development will start at that level, and in a way, you see companies growing from that ward, becoming local government-dominated entities, becoming state-dominated entities before they are even related to the federal government. So I think all the three tiers of government must also be up and doing in terms of how they grow the economy of their jurisdictions.
And also, the president has been very consistent with his message to foreign investors. He says Nigeria is now truly open for business. For you, how favorable will you describe the business environment in the country?
Yes, the president is, Nigeria is open to business. We are all buying into that vision. And it starts from the CAC, how the registration process. What had been a major challenge or hindrance to business development in Nigeria, and it had been established by empirical studies, that access to licensing, because in most activities, in most segments of the economy, anybody that is coming in needs license to operate. And unfortunately, that limitation is reflecting in the flow of foreign direct investment into our economy. So while we have a broad range of foreign direct investments, the aspect of equity investment is affected because you don't have foreign investors, potential foreign investors coming in their numbers to invest in equity. And I'm not talking of equity in stock market. You have portfolio investors. The larger percentage of investors that are coming into Nigeria now are portfolio investors who are attracted, by the good, in quotes, by the good interest rate they are earning on treasury bills and bonds, So you have a population, a crowd of that coming in to exploit that. But that is considered hot money at any issue. If once there is an issue of discomfort, they are the first to take off and get out of the jurisdiction. But when you have investors investing in companies, equities in companies, in developing companies, either manufacturing companies, financial sector companies, insurance and others, you have more stable form of investment. And that investment will grow, over time. It will provide opportunity for employment. It will enlarge capacity, of Nigerian workers. And so that's the kind of investment we are looking at. I believe that with the reforms ongoing, especially we also know the reforms on the tax reform will affect this kind of activities we are looking at. And beyond that, we also know that the Trade and Industry Ministry is doing a lot of making a lot of engagement in terms of how to attract foreign investors into the country in such a way that its own agencies that it ministers, that it administers, are also up and doing in terms of how they relate with foreign partners. So to a large extent, in one word, there's a need more for active engagement by Nigerian MDAs responsible for business processes, to as much as possible create an environment or a culture of excellence in the way they engage with incoming foreign partners.
All right, then. So I'd like us to wrap up tonight's conversation with your perspectives on why the tax reform bills have generated so much controversy. Dr. Kisiju, what's the confusion about?
I don't see any confusion. I just believe that there's a deliberate maneuver by a number of people who initially read the bills and rushed through it and formed opinions that were not fundamentals and, of course, that were not truthful. And by the time they got into the public space, their position had been identified with them. And they, rather than, of course, be humble enough to accept their mistakes, they are just trying to make a case for their initial position. Because when you thoroughly look at the bills, whatever aspect of it is done in the national interest. Is it the major one that we are talking about, this derivative thing? Now, I think there is a misunderstanding. It came from a basic misunderstanding of that derivation, or even the value-added tax concept. Most Nigerians, how do I call it, leaders, especially at the political level, don't even understand what value-added tax means. Most of them consider it a consumption tax. Consumption tax is different from value-added tax. Value-added tax is the percentage of tax or levy that is charged on the transformation of a product from one form to the other. And when it goes to the next layer of transformation, the primary person that made the deduction, that was deducted from, would recover the deduction, as it goes to the next layer. So people just think that it is when you sell at the end of the value chain, at the consumption value chain, that you had value added tax. So if there's an understanding of what the value added tax means in the real sense of it, no state will know that it will be deprived of the outcome or the earnings on the tax. But most importantly, states will also have to understand the fact that whatever is coming out of your state, let it go through a process so that you don't just rush your tomato from the gate farm or from the farm gate to the market in Lagos, or you don't rush your cassava from the farm gate to the market in Abuja. Ensure that there's a process starts at your own within your own jurisdiction. When that process starts, the tax is charged at that level, and by the time it goes to the next level, the next user, that tax is deducted, and a certain percentage is also taken back to you. So the derivation per se becomes the forms of consumption, the forms of transformation that takes place on the item per term. So everybody, the only thing that will now be, what will now be involved is to ensure that at every point in time, there's a form of transformation, and that transformation becomes an earning in a way for both the state and the federal government at that level.
All right, but are you confident that this committee that's just been set up can resolve some of these contentious issues?
Yes, of course. Nigerians will like to talk, right. And that is why everybody is talking about more consultation. I also am aware of the fact that the committee, the Oyedele committee, did a lot of consultation, but they didn't see how important that task was. So some people were not even ready for it until now.
Absolutely.
So I believe we will talk and resolve this issue.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Dr. Niyi Akisiji, journalist, writer, chairman, Independent Media and Policy Initiative. Thank you so much for your time on politics tonight. Please have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I consider it a privilege. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, sir. And thank you very much for watching, everyone. That marks the end of today's episode of Politics Tonight. But you can watch the repeat broadcast of this episode at 12:30 midnight. Get in touch with us on our social media handles, Facebook, Instagram, and X at TVC News NG and at Olajumoke WO using the hashtag Politics Tonight. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. I am Olajumoke.